Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the forgotten gutters of the galaxy, where even the stars seem too tired to shine, something ancient festers. It is not a war machine or a daemon, not a Xenos empire with grand fleets and empires of bone and brass. It is older, quieter, something that does not conquer space but devours time. These creatures do not march, they seep. They do not shout, they murmur from the shadows of memory. They are the Hrud. To speak of the Hrud is to try and hold on to smoke in a storm. Every time we think we know them, they dissolve, warp, age, vanish. They are a species so disjointed from our temporal reality that merely being near one is to risk years vanishing from your life in seconds. And yet, in the murmurings of forgotten soldiers, in the censored margins of inquisitorial reports, in the madness of time-lost psychers, we hear of them. Not as a race of monsters, but as the creeping entropy at the edge of everything. The reminder that decay is not just inevitable, it is alive. The origins of the Hrud are a wound in the fabric of known galactic history. A hole where understanding should be, a mystery so deep and corrosive that even the most obsessed scholars can't decide if they're dealing with a race or a phenomenon. Official records are a patchwork of contradictions. Some Adeptus biologist savants classify them as a type of verminous Xenos. Others whisper in late-night litanies that the Hrud might predate the Imperium itself, perhaps even predating the rise of humanity. And beyond the Imperium, among the ragged stars and dying archives of long-dead civilizations, their shadows linger like cancerous footnotes. Some claim that the Hrud were once something else entirely. A noble, proud species twisted by some ancient calamity. Perhaps they were shaped in the crucible of the war in heaven, another casualty of the Old One's war against the Necrons and the Khitan. A few even go so far as to theorize that the Hrud are the detritus of some temporal weapon or curse unleashed during those unfathomable battles, left to rot in the seams of space-time. The idea of them being refugees of a war so ancient that time itself tried to forget them sends shivers down the spine. They would not have been defeated in any traditional sense. No grand surrender, no last stand. Instead, they melted into the folds of history, surviving by retreating not into distance, but into time. Other, darker theories insist that the Hrud are not natural at all, that they were created, not born. Perhaps they are the failed outcome of an ancient experiment by the dark age of technology's most arrogant techno-sorcerers. Or worse, constructs of the warp that gained a form in real space through some malignant twist of fate. The Adeptus Mechanicus is deeply wary of them. And not just because the Hrud's presence decays machines faster than rust in acid. There's a theory buried in Mechanicus vaults that the Hrud might be walking byproducts of a forbidden experiment in chronal manipulation, and that time itself is unraveling wherever they gather because they were never meant to exist at all. Among the more metaphysical elements of the ecclesiarchy, the Hrud are spoken of as the forgotten children of entropy. To these firebrand preachers, they are walking heresies, things that offend the Emperor's design by their mere persistence. Their very nature is an affront, not because they are cruel, but because they are broken in a way that spreads. But there is one recurring theme across cultures that know of them. The Hrud are survivors. They endure. Whether they were cursed by gods or science, or were born from the rotting spine of a decayed universe, they have learned the only lesson that matters in the 41st millennium: survive, no matter the cost. Even the Eldar speak of beings that may be the Hrud, although with typical arrogance and vagueness. Their myth cycles refer to entities known as the Nakari, ghosts that feed on history itself, leaving only distortion and silence in their wake. Whether this is just another name for the Hrud or an attempt by the Eldar to deny the reality of something they cannot understand, no one knows. But there's something deeply poetic in the idea of a race that, having lost its place in time, has turned that wound into a weapon. They do not simply live in the present, they haunt the idea of time. What makes the Hrud so terrifying is not their violence, but their refusal to fit into any known pattern of galactic behavior. They are not building an empire. They are not waging a war. They do not make alliances or forge treaties. They do not have a homeworld that can be invaded or a hierarchy that can be decapitated. Instead, they drift, like the smoke of burnt time, infesting the hidden ducts of hive cities, the blind spots of auspex scans, the forgotten ruins of dead stars. You don't find them. You realize too late that they were already there. And yet, there's a tragic undertone beneath all the horror. Because if the Hrud were once like us, if they truly were another proud people brought low by entropy and madness, then everything they are now is a survival strategy. A compromise with reality so profound that they had to break it to keep going. Imagine having to eat history to avoid being erased. Imagine being so far out of sync with time that you have to bleed it from others just to stay coherent. That isn't just monstrous, that's desperate. So perhaps the greatest horror of the Hrud isn't their power. It's what they represent. The universe doesn't care about glory or heroism or even survival. It only cares about decay. And the Hrud are decay made flesh. The proof that even when the stars die, something will crawl through the ashes, still alive, still hungry, still hiding from the past it cannot forget. Trying to define the physicality of the Hrud is like trying to sketch a shadow cast by smoke. Nothing about them is stable. The very idea of form seems to be optional in their existence. Witness accounts, few and always deeply disturbed, describe their shapes as draped and indistinct, clothed in robes or rags that may be part of their bodies or a mimicry of modesty. Others describe a mass of twitching limbs, hunched backs, or hungrily curling appendages, shifting between moments as though reality struggles to decide what they should look like. But these descriptions, maddening in their inconsistency, may not contradict each other. Instead, they may all be true, just seen from different temporal slices of the same moment. What passes for Hrud anatomy is theorized to be an unstable amalgamation of organic and chronal flux. Imagine a creature that is constantly in motion, not spatially, but temporally. Their organs, if they even have them, might exist in non-linear fashion, phasing in and out of time. This would explain why autopsies of Hrud remains, when they are rarely obtained and do not decay into useless mush before study, often result in nonsensical findings. Bones that vanish when unobserved. Tissue that reverses its age depending on where the scalpel touches. Cells that simultaneously exhibit decay and regeneration. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in the rare instances where they've had access to what might be Hrud biological matter, report something utterly anomalous. Mitochondria that generate entropy rather than energy. Neurons that remember future events more clearly than past ones. Even the simplest cellular activity defies the logical progression of cause and effect. It's no wonder that many tech priests who attempt to study them suffer breakdowns or lose months of memory. Some go so far as to claim that the Hrud body isn't a body at all. It's a localized field of temporal distortion masquerading as matter. Their eyes, when visible, are often described as glimmering orbs, glowing with internal, sickly light. Not the radiant purity of Eldar gems or the fiery zeal of the Emperor's Chosen, but something much more pitiless. The cold radiance of dead stars or the faint burn of old radiation. These orbs don't simply see. They seem to perceive across layers, as if tracking the observer not just in the present, but across their entire lifespan. To be seen by a Hrud is to feel known by something impossibly old and infinitely tired. Their limbs are another strange matter. Some accounts say they possess many, others only 2. But what is consistent is that their movement appears distorted, like a visual echo. Observers often report that Hrud limbs move before they are lifted, or lag behind as if struggling to reattach to the moment. This creates an almost nauseating effect, as if the Hrud's body is constantly playing catch-up with its own existence. No wonder that those who survive encounters with them suffer vertigo, hallucinations, or even collapse due to time displacement sickness. Even more disturbing are the pheromonal and psychological effects they have on surrounding life forms. It's believed that the Hrud exude a field of despair and amnesia, a side effect of their temporal warping. The closer one gets to them, the more memory begins to slip. Names of comrades fade. Orders are forgotten. The moment loses coherence. This passive defense mechanism makes them almost impossible to track. Infected areas become haunted zones, places where entire squads disappear without a shot fired, and the only thing left is a lingering fog of unease. Then there's their decay aura, a subtle but ruinous effect that seems to age everything around them. Metal rusts, servitors glitch, Parchment yellows into dust. Some Mechanicus researchers believe this is due to quantum field leakage. The Hrud emit time as if it were radiation, forcibly accelerating entropy in nearby matter. A lasgun might age a century in their presence and fail without firing. A bolt round might crumble before it explodes. Even simple human tissue, particularly the elderly or infirm, can wither into death merely from standing too near for too long. But for all this, the Hrud are not invincible. Their biology, such as it is fragile and easily destroyed when it can be targeted. They are slow in a conventional sense, and many appear physically withered or starved. The danger lies not in their brute strength, but in their relationship to the fundamental fabric of time. A Hrud in combat doesn't fight with superior firepower or armor. It fights by causing the battlefield to unravel. Time bends, seconds skip, enemies age decades between heartbeats. A bullet misses because it was never fired. A command is never issued because it was forgotten before it left the lips. There is also a persistent theory among radical xenologists that the Hrud are not a species in the traditional sense. They might be manifestations of a disease, a mimetic, temporal infection that warps creatures across time into its shape. This would explain their divergent appearances and strange behavior. It would also mean that the Hrud might not be born, but created. Every encounter a potential infection, every witness a future Hrud. This idea that the Hrud are not individuals but symptoms of a universal sickness chills even the most hardened inquisitors. Because if it is true, then the galaxy is not simply under threat from an enemy that consumes time. It is incubating one. The Hrud time field is not just a weapon. It is a natural state of being that warps reality around these beings in ways that bend the mind and break the body. Unlike a force field or a psyker's aura, the Hrud time field is a localized disruption of causality itself. It's not just that things age in their presence, it's that time, in all its linearity and logic, ceases to obey its own rules. This field is the true core of the Hrud, more essential than flesh or bone, perhaps even more vital than consciousness. Without it, they would likely vanish, lost to the crushing progression of unprotected time. Accounts of Hrud attacks rarely mention a charge or an ambush in the conventional sense. Instead, there's a moment, always described with confusion, where something feels wrong. A sudden stillness, the sound of footfalls repeating out of sync, the taste of iron. Then soldiers begin to crumble. Veterans drop to their knees, their hair graying in seconds. Weapons corrode in hands. Vox channels sputter with screams and silence. It is not battle, it is collapse. The Hrud do not need to kill. They simply arrive, and time does the rest. Scientific attempts to measure the field have produced only madness. Chronometers brought near known Hrud locations desynchronize from reality, counting hours in minutes or freezing entirely. Some begin ticking backwards. One inquisitorial report even described a situation where a Hrud-infested facility had interior clocks showing dates centuries in the past and others millennia in the future. Simultaneously, it's not just personal time being distorted, it's history itself, rewritten at the edges, breaking down into loops, echoes, and silences. Imagine an area where yesterday might bleed into tomorrow, where the idea of a present is unstable. In such places, battle records become unreliable. Did the guardsmen engage at dawn, or did the Hrud arrive before the scouts were even born? Entire regiments are sometimes found, weapons in hand, frozen in states of advanced age, teeth fallen out, bones brittle, though they had deployed only hours earlier. Autopsies reveal cellular degeneration akin to creatures centuries old. Medicae staff call it spontaneous systemic senescence. The Ordo Xenos calls it temporal trauma. This field doesn't stop at physical aging. Thought and memory erode just as swiftly. Those exposed speak of dreams they never had or memories from futures that never occurred. Psychers, more sensitive to the flow of time and warp space, suffer the worst. Some spontaneously combust. Others are flung into catatonia, mumbling nonsense that sounds eerily prophetic or backwards. The most disturbing case involved a sanctioned psyker who began speaking with a voice that matched a transcript of her own last words, spoken 3 days later. When those days passed, she uttered them again, this time with full knowledge of what was coming. Because the field is not purely a physical phenomenon, There's a growing belief among rogue scholars that the Hrud time field may be an interface between real space and the immaterium. That is to say, it might be a kind of warp resonance, not the raw psychic violence of a demonic incursion, but a gentler, subtler distortion that leaks through the cracks of reality. The Hrud, in this theory, are not just time-warping creatures. They are walking rips in the veil of causality. Their very presence may expose areas of the galaxy to deep time warping, making them echo chambers for history's collapse. This could explain reports of chronal bleed in Hrud zones, strange voices heard long after evacuation, shadows that move in patterns from previous days, or even the reappearance of slain comrades who seem unaware they've died. Some have tried to weaponize these phenomena, but every attempt has ended in disaster. One Mechanicus experiment to trap a Hrud time field within a stasis box led to the spontaneous aging of the entire research station, along with all 27 adepts, reduced to skeletons within minutes. The box was later found open, empty, and warm to the touch. Another curious effect of the time field is its apparent selectivity. It does not seem to affect all things equally. Some plants grow faster near the Hrud, while others wilt. Some data slates become unreadable. Others fill with streams of corrupted, seemingly prophetic text. One incident in the hive world of Styrod involved a Pict recorder catching a glimpse of a Hrud and immediately overwriting itself with images from 10 years prior, revealing the very room before it was even constructed. The machine was never repaired, and the Picts are now studied by inquisitors with growing unease. There is a fear, never spoken aloud, but palpable in the highest echelons of the Ordo Xenos, that the Hrud time field is growing stronger. That as more of them migrate, the boundary between moments may be eroding. Not just in their immediate vicinity, but across wider regions. Entire sectors have begun to report causal blurs, events repeating, impossible weather, entire star systems that seem out of phase with known star maps. It may be that the Hrud are no longer anomalies in the current, but signs of a deeper breakdown. That the flow of time, long stable since the Great Rift's opening, is starting to boil. What's even more disturbing is that the Hrud themselves seem dependent on this field. Without it, they weaken, dissolve, or worse, revert. Some theories suggest that they are constantly fighting off their own temporal collapse, feeding on nearby chronal energy like parasites of causality. Their hunger is not for flesh or fuel, but for moments, for persistence. To exist in a universe that rejects them, they must eat time, stealing it from others, moment by precious moment. To imagine a civilization shaped by the relentless erosion of time is to peer into a realm of silence and slow disintegration. If the Hrud possess anything resembling a society, it is one formed not around growth or conquest, but survival against the howling void of entropy. Their culture, if it can be called that, exists in the margins. Not just of physical space, but of memory, of time itself. It does not build monuments, it leaves no lasting imprint. Instead, it flickers, fading even as it forms like frost on glass, beautiful, brief, and ultimately vanishing. What little is known or guessed about Hrud's social structures comes not from direct observation, but from ruins, traces, and scattered reports. There are suggestions of communal nesting behavior, with multiple individuals clustering in the underlayers of hive cities, deep void ships, or abandoned worlds. These nests, sometimes called congregation zones by xenologists, seem to be constructed from layers of refuse, decayed matter, and chronally warped architecture. Rooms that fold into themselves, hallways that loop, corridors where doors lead backward into their own entrance. These aren't habitats in the traditional sense. They're time shelters, distorted zones where the flow of reality is slowed, halted, or looped, allowing the Hrud to rest in moments that last longer than the outside world allows. Within these shelters, communication between Hrud appears to occur in a manner far beyond conventional language. Human observers report low-frequency murmurs, bursts of electromagnetic radiation, or even synchronized distortions in the local time field. One unsettling theory suggests that Hrud may not speak in words at all, but in chronal pulses, brief, timed bursts of reality-altering energy that convey meaning through the manipulation of cause and effect itself. It would be like speaking in skipped heartbeats, in the fading of memories, in déjà vu. To understand such a language would require experiencing it, not hearing it. A form of communication that bypasses the rational mind and roots itself in the subconscious. There are also hints of hierarchy, not through dominance or governance, but through time mastery. Older Hrud, if such a thing can be measured linearly, exhibit greater control over their distortion fields and can anchor themselves more effectively against the collapsing fabric of their existence. These elders might act as both temporal anchors and leaders, guiding migrations, maintaining the stability of congregation zones, and teaching younger Hrud how to feed, how to draw time from the world without shattering it entirely. The tragic implication here is that wisdom, for the Hrud, is simply the ability to survive longer without being erased. Artifacts found in the wake of Hrud presence sometimes show evidence of primitive iconography, spirals, loops, jagged lines etched into metal or stone. Some inquisitorial researchers believe these to be symbolic representations of their relationship to time: the spiral for nonlinear memory, the jagged line for temporal decay, the loop for resurrection or repetition. Whether these symbols are religious, mnemonic, or purely functional is unclear. But they suggest a species that thinks in terms of time, not space, a civilization of moments rather than monuments. There are even whispers that the Hrud may possess a kind of spiritual philosophy, not worship in the human sense, but a reverence for entropy. If true, it would make them perhaps the only race in the galaxy that does not fear decay, but embraces it. Some radical scholars suggest they may view time as a river, and themselves as parasites clinging to its banks, or perhaps as swimmers trying to flow backward against the tide. To feed is not just to survive, but to restore balance. To erase the false permanence of stone and flesh and memory, and return the galaxy to its natural state of dissolution. And in this, perhaps, lies the bleakest truth of all. The Hrud do not hate. They do not rage. They do not seek revenge or dominance. They are not predators out of hunger, nor conquerors out of pride. They are what remains when all other motivations have rotted away. Survival in its rawest, most essential form. A need to exist in a universe that would prefer they did not. If they kill, it is because time is scarce. If they erase, it is because they must. Imagine a society where every child must learn not only how to speak, but how to stabilize themselves in the moment. Where education is not about history or art, but how to avoid becoming undone. Imagine the communal rituals, the anchoring moments where Hrud gather to reinforce each other's presence, sharing stolen seconds like prayers. Imagine mourning not for the dead, but for those who were forgotten, whose names and deeds were lost to the tide of unraveling time. Not because no one remembers, but because remembering itself has become impossible. In such a culture, love, hate, and ambition would have no meaning. What would matter is continuity, the preservation of self against the corrosion of time. The Hrud may not know joy or sorrow as we do, but they may know something deeper, a quiet, persistent yearning not to fade, not to vanish into the pages of history, but to remain, even as the ink of reality runs dry. And that, more than any weapon or power, is why they endure. When the Hrud migrate, it is not a march or an exodus, it is an unraveling. These events, known among scattered records and haunted vox logs as long nights, are not invasions. They are temporal avalanches, entire worlds swallowed in silence and senescence. No banners are raised, no warnings are given. A planet might go to sleep under starlight and wake up buried beneath centuries of rot. The Hrud do not knock on the door of civilization. They slip through the cracks in its foundation and let time do the rest. The long nights are not frequent, but when they happen, they leave scars on history. Take, for instance, the ghost world of Dalcor 3. Once a thriving trade hub, filled with refineries and cathedral towers, it now stands silent, its spires bent with rust, its vox channels echoing only static. There was no war, no bombardment. Just a steady increase in temporal anomalies, clocks ticking wrong, children aging years overnight, crops withering moments after blooming. By the time the administratum responded, the population was already gone. No bodies, just clothing left in place, scattered in dining halls, factories, beds, as if the people had aged into dust where they stood. This is the horror of Hrud migration. It is not an act of aggression, it is survival writ large. When the time anchors of a nest or congregation zone begin to fail, the Hrud move. Not by ship or gate in the traditional sense, but through the collapsing veins of real space. Their paths seem unpredictable, but patterns begin to emerge if you look long enough. They follow decay, worlds already fraying at the edges, civilizations weakened by war or warp storms. Like scavengers of time, they descend on the dying. During migration, their numbers swell. Hrud that had hidden for decades, centuries even, stir from the shadows and join the flow. There are rumors of old nests activating beacon-like pulses, not across space, but through time itself, drawing distant kin together. As the migration begins, time itself becomes unstable. Days loop, seasons blend, architecture warps under the stress of unnatural duration. Buildings seem older in the morning than they were the night before. People forget their names. Entire populations vanish without ever leaving their homes. One of the most chilling examples comes from the mining moon of Voron's Hollow. In a rare surviving data slate retrieved by a black ship, an adept recorded how the sky turned gray and the stars vanished. Not clouded, gone. As if the moon had slid sideways in time, losing track of its place in the galaxy. He wrote of coworkers who died of old age within hours, of children who spoke with the voices of elders, of machines that refused to function because they no longer recognized the present. His final entry simply reads, "I can feel myself becoming unstuck." Imperial forces have attempted to respond to these migrations, but with little success. By the time signs are detected, often disguised as plague or warp spill, the damage is done. Guard regiments sent to affected zones report severe psychological trauma, confusion, and systemic failure of all equipment. Vox links become incoherent, relaying messages from past transmissions or garbled signals from unknown dates. Even astropaths become unreliable, receiving messages before they are sent or hearing the last thoughts of their future selves. The Adeptus Mechanicus once tried to counter a Hrud migration by sealing an entire subsector under stasis lock, freezing dozens of worlds in time. It worked, for a moment, but when the lock was lifted, all that remained was ash and silence. The Hrud had not only bypassed the defense, but the time anchor itself had drawn them in. Like moths to a flame, they fed upon the very chronal energy meant to keep them out. Not all Hrud migrations end in devastation. In rare cases, the species passes through a world without triggering full collapse. These instances are usually marked by local legends, the Sleeping Plague, Whisper Winds, or the Grey Fog. These are the luckier settlements, left aged and shaken, but not erased. Survivors often carry deep temporal scars, years missing from their memories, or entire lives aged decades in a single breath. One haunting tale speaks of a city where statues appeared overnight, each bearing perfect likenesses of missing citizens. The truth? They were the citizens, ossified by time, frozen in their last moments. No one knows what drives a migration. Hunger? Instinct? A deeper purpose unknown to all but the Hrud themselves? Some theorists believe they are not aimless, but are mapping a path, not across the stars, but through time itself. That each migration is a ripple in a vast chronal pattern, guiding the Hrud toward a future they have already seen. A future they may be trying to prevent, or perhaps a future they are creating. This possibility, that the Hrud migrations are part of a larger plan, is terrifying. Because if true, it suggests the Hrud are not just survivors but pilgrims, and time itself is their holy path, winding and broken. A path they must walk again and again, leaving ghost towns and faded memories in their wake. And perhaps if we could follow that path far enough, we would find the beginning, or the end, or both. To the Imperium, the Hrud are a paradox, creatures too significant to ignore, yet too elusive to classify. Their name exists in thousands of censored reports and redacted campaign logs, always on the periphery, always stained with suspicion and fear. They're not treated as a formal Xenos threat in most codices or battle doctrines. There are no standard engagement protocols, no standing orders to exterminate on sight. And that's not because the Hrud are rare, it's because they're unreal. They defy logic, make a mockery of the Imperial record, and leave behind results so disturbing that entire files are struck from the archives rather than explained. The average guardsman doesn't know what a Hrud is, but some of them have seen them, or at least think they have. Hushed whispers in the barracks speak of patrol routes where the air tastes old, of flickering lights and shadows that shouldn't be there. Sometimes it's a crewmate who vanishes mid-sentence. Other times it's an officer who starts to age rapidly, his voice growing gravelly before collapsing in on himself. There are stories of entire units lost in underhive raids, their last vox logs full of panicked gibberish about the walls decaying and time looping. The higher-ups dismiss these as warp anomalies or unreported demonic interference. But the stories persist. They pass through the ranks like ghost stories or warnings. What makes the Hrud so particularly terrifying to the Imperium is that they don't fit the familiar categories of threat. They don't invade like the orcs. They don't corrupt like chaos. They don't manipulate like the Eldar or Tyranids. Instead, they erase. Their presence leads to entropy and memory loss, to physical and chronological degradation. An entire outpost can vanish into senescence, its voxcasters still muttering old orders long after everyone's dead. And when Imperial officials try to document what happened, the information unravels. Paper rots, data becomes corrupted, memories fade, even the truth becomes too old to recall. Some Inquisitors have tried to fight this by increasing documentation, overlogging, over-recording, setting up vox ghosts and autoquills to record every second in affected zones. But these efforts often backfire. In one infamous case, the massive data logging system of a watch station corrupted itself so severely that it began broadcasting reports from its own future, predicting events that never happened and confusing command to the point of paralysis. A month later, the entire station was found abandoned, with furniture arranged in impossible geometries and cogitators filled with centuries of false data. No Hrud were seen, but none doubted they had been there. The Administratum, for its part, deals with the Hrud the way it handles all inconvenient phenomena. It reclassifies. Incidents suspected to be caused by Hrud are filed under temporal aberration events, localized chronal decay, or, when desperation reigns, acts of the warp. By burying the Hrud under layers of bureaucracy and redefinition, the Imperium maintains the illusion of control. After all, if something can't be cleanly categorized, then it can't threaten the system. Not officially. And yet, behind the scenes, the Ordo Xenos knows better. There are dedicated cells, unofficial, unacknowledged, that do nothing but monitor potential Hrud movement. They triangulate data loss, unexplained decay patterns, aging anomalies, and psychic ripple effects. They track the silent erosion of time itself, knowing that wherever the threads are thinning, the Hrud may be near. These Inquisitors are among the most paranoid in the galaxy, not just because they fear the Hrud, but because they fear what the Hrud imply. That time is not a constant, that history is not secure, and that the Imperium's own archives, its sacred bureaucratic spine, can be quietly consumed without a single shot fired. There's a chilling account from a Deathwatch kill team's after-action report on the fringe world of Trevix. The team had been sent to investigate a Xenos anomaly. What they found was an abandoned manufactorum, rusted and collapsed in on itself despite records showing it had only been built a decade ago. Within, they encountered flickers, not daemons, but shadows of events playing out in reverse or loop. One member aged to dust when he stepped into a stairwell. Another spoke with his own voice from an hour in the future. They glimpsed a cloaked figure, impossibly tall, with a hunched gait, watching them from behind a veil of heat distortion. They fired. The rounds passed through. They extracted what data they could and fled. Days later, they reviewed their helmet cams, only to find their own footage had aged into visual mush, overwritten with events from years prior, showing them never arriving at all. This kind of psychological and temporal warfare is uniquely devastating. The Imperium can face enemies who shoot, slash, or burn, but how does it face an enemy who undoes? An enemy that doesn't occupy space but devours time? The concept of war doesn't apply cleanly. Hrud aren't beaten in combat, they're avoided, contained, or fled from. Tactical doctrine doesn't apply. Orders can't be followed if time itself no longer behaves. The Imperial Creed has little to say on the Hrud. The Ecclesiarchy avoids mention of them, perhaps sensing the theological danger they pose. If time is the Emperor's will, if the Imperium is a timeless beacon of order, then what does it mean when creatures like the Hrud can unravel time itself? Are they the Emperor's test, or the universe's rejection of his order? The questions are too dangerous to answer, and so the silence remains. And yet, even in this silence, the fear grows. Because somewhere, in the forgotten ducts of a hive world, or the decaying orbit of an abandoned void station, something cloaked and slow-moving might be watching. Not hunting for prey, but for presence, for moments unguarded, for time still rich with meaning. And the Imperium, ancient and overstretched, offers it plenty to feed on. The presence of the Hrud is like a poison in the bloodstream of technology, a silent sickness that corrodes not through force but through inevitability. Where they walk, machines do not scream. They whimper, glitch, and die. Auspex arrays stutter and read ghosts. Vox units broadcast the wrong time or messages never sent. Even the most sacred relics of the Adeptus Mechanicus, built to last 10 millennia, crumble as though forgotten by the machine god himself. The Hrud do not need weapons. They are weapons, of a kind far older and more patient than any forge world could imagine. The decay they radiate is not simply rust or entropy in the physical sense. It's a corruption of temporal fidelity, a breakdown of what now means for matter. Bolters age into obsolescence between shots. Reactor cores flicker as their power sources remember centuries of wear in moments. Servo skulls collapse mid-flight, twitching as their memory stacks fill with corrupted timestamps. In one infamous incident aboard the cruiser Lex Talionis, an entire deck exposed to Hrud presence suffered a retrograde collapse. Cogitators recorded logs from before the ship had been commissioned. A tech priest found his own corpse already rotting beside his still-breathing form. And the ship's machine spirit, maddened by contradicting time codes, imploded its own core. But while machines falter and rot, it is psychers who suffer most. The Hrud's effect on the warp is not merely disruptive, it is defiling. Psychers who come into proximity with a Hrud often suffer from what has come to be known as chrono shatter. They begin to lose grip not only on the present, but on their own timelines. Visions bleed together. Premonitions of doom are overwritten by childhood memories that never occurred. Sanctioned psychers have reported being unable to maintain psychic cohesion, as if their very soul is being tugged in different directions across their lifetime. This isn't simply a side effect. It's likely a function of the Hrud's natural chronal manipulation. They exist in a state of partial temporal dissociation, constantly slipping along threads of causality. A psyker, already half-rooted in the warp where time is fluid, is an easy target. The psychic mind cannot tolerate such raw instability. It tries to reconcile timelines that don't align. The result is madness, or worse. One report from a black ship describes a Hrud exposure that left a room of astropaths whispering each other's futures in perfect unison, until their minds cracked and they began speaking in reverse. More terrifying still is the concept that Hrud may feed on psychic resonance as part of their temporal hunger. This would explain the disproportionate reaction psychers have to their presence. It might not be a side effect at all, but a form of feeding, drawing not just time from a being, but potential. The Hrud might leech futures, strip possibilities, drain paths of what could happen, and leave only decay behind. This would align with accounts of precognitive psychers losing their ability to foresee events after a Hrud encounter, as if the future itself has been eaten. The Adeptus Mechanicus, obsessed with the machine and its eternal nature, find the Hrud uniquely repulsive, not merely because they cause technology to fail, but because they defy the notion that machines, or anything, can be made immortal. The Hrud are a living rebuttal to the cult Mechanicus's most sacred beliefs. They are the unmaking of permanence. They are the desecration of perfection. And perhaps most heretical of all, they remind the red-robed priests that even knowledge, once stored, can decay. That data, once fixed, can rot and become meaningless. A heretic named Magos Vedran once tried to contain a Hrud in a quantum temporal stasis chamber. His goal was to study the decaying effects on memory core architecture. Within 2 days, the chamber collapsed. The cogitator logs later recovered suggested that Vedran had interacted with the Hrud for a subjective 5 months. During that time, his notes changed tone, from curiosity to worship. He began referring to the Hrud not as a creature, but as a chrono-saint, a being that revealed the ultimate truth. All structures, all thoughts, all things collapse. He vanished from his forge complex shortly after, leaving behind a sphere of inert metal that aged to dust in under a week. The implications of such effects are staggering. In the rare cases where a Hrud's time field overlaps with sensitive technology, such as warp engines or Geller fields, the consequences can be catastrophic. Warp jumps taken through chronally unstable zones have resulted in ships arriving decades off schedule, or before they ever launched. In one case, a vessel arrived at its destination only to find its own wreckage already there, rusted and broken. The crew died, trying to understand how they were already dead. These anomalies are not isolated, they are accumulating. Across the Imperium, sectors report rising failures of machine systems in areas not known for conflict or decay. Forge worlds speak of data loss, of logic engines erasing their own operating cores. Psychers report brief flashes of non-existence, dreams of times that never were. Some whisper that the Hrud are not simply scavengers, but the spearpoint of something larger, a wave of entropic collapse sweeping outward. That their presence in our time is increasing because our reality is becoming vulnerable. The Hrud are not bringing death. Death is simple. What they bring is unbeing. The unraveling not just of life, but of meaning, function, purpose. In their presence, machines forget what they were made to do. Psychers forget why they were born. And humanity, so arrogant in its mastery of both machine and mind, is reminded that it too can be unmade, not with fire, but with forgetting. And so we arrive at a darker crossroad. Are the Hrud monsters or victims? This question does not have an easy answer. It may be the only question that truly matters. To label the Hrud as villains is to impose human morality on a being outside time, outside narrative. They kill not from malice, but out of necessity. Time is their food, their breath, their survival. They do not murder in the name of conquest. They consume in order to exist. From their perspective, the universe is a feast. We are the courses. They do not delight in pain. They dread oblivion. Yet from our vantage, what choice do we have? A species that ages you to death is no ally. A being that erases your lineage as easily as ink on water is no neutral. The Hrud do not negotiate, they destabilize. They do not barter, they devour. To allow them ingress is to allow the slow death of memory, history, identity. In a sense, the Hrud embody the ultimate tragedy, the hunger for existence in a universe that would deny them any permanence. Imagine being cursed to exist only at the expense of others' lives. To cling to time by hollowing it out from around you, leaving nothing but decay in your wake. The despair of that is profound. The irony is even more cruel. The more the Hrud feed, the more they threaten their own foundation, time itself. It is possible that in some alternate lens, the Hrud deserve pity. Their forms are unstable. Their memory is fragmentary. They may not even remember who or what they once were. They are the hollowed-out shells of what might have been, sustained by the fragments of other lives. Their existence is defiance. Defiance of oblivion, but at a terrible cost. To pity them is not to excuse them. It is to recognize that they are bound by a broken fate. And perhaps in that pity lies the best strategy against them, not brute force. It is useless when time itself is the weapon. Perhaps we can starve them, deny them chronal resources, harden realities so they cannot leech our moments, find anchors of temporal stability and shield them, build chronal sanctuaries where time is fixed, unyielding. Observatories, paradox resonators, psychic stabilizers, technologies or rituals that defend existence itself. But such strategies are speculative, desperate. We do what we must, purge the fractures, contain the zones, isolate the outbreaks. We intercept migrations, lay traps in time, mark the weak, and guard them. Yet always the Hrud are partially unknowable, the worm at the edge of chronology, the leak in causality, the quiet eroder of history. Whatever they are, devourers, sufferers, or both, the Hrud stand as an existential threat. Not just to flesh and bone, but to narrative, to memory, to the continuity of all we are. And in fighting them, we are not merely defending lives, we are defending time itself. Recorded encounters with the Hrud are among the rarest and most disturbing in the annals of Imperial warfare. Not because they don't happen, but because they almost never survive intact in memory or data. Every skirmish is like a ghost story bleeding into a war log. The facts are always brittle, shadowed, and incomplete. Yet some of these events burn through the fog, standing as chilling testaments to how even a fleeting brush with the Hrud can destabilize entire operations. One of the most infamous is the scourge of Risa Gamma II, a manufactorum hive located deep within the Risa system's outer colonies. For 3 weeks, Vox signals from Gamma 2 grew erratic. Tech priests reported unusual sensor ghosts and erratic energy readings. Then, entire work crews began aging out of existence. Workers screamed as their skin collapsed into gray folds, as their limbs twisted into brittle bone. Surveillance servitors caught images of a cloaked figure weaving through the halls, always blurred, always just beyond the lens. When the Skitarii response team arrived, they found a manufactorum aged 5,000 years beyond its construction, its metal frame eaten through by time, its databanks filled with entries from dates that had never occurred. No trace of the Hrud remained. The forge was sealed and marked for eternal quarantine. In another case, the hollowing of Varela, an entire PDF regiment reported temporal anomalies during a routine underhive sweep. At first, they attributed the oddities to warp residue from nearby cult activity. Then things began to degrade. Vox chatter looped, ammunition aged inside its casings. One officer reported receiving a distress call from himself, time-stamped 3 days in the future. By the time reinforcements arrived, the regiment was gone. Only their outlines remained, scorched into stone like shadows after a nuclear flash, but distorted, stretched into impossible geometries, some reaching into ceilings or through bulkhead walls. Autopsies on the recovered remains, what few were coherent enough to analyze, showed the soldiers had aged over 200 years in mere hours. Nearby pict logs captured a flicker of a hunched form, wrapped in ragged robes, bending space around it like a black hole bends light. These events are not isolated. Over the centuries, Deathwatch kill teams have cataloged more than 60 distinct combat instances involving Hrud entities, though the data is often fragmented or redacted. The Skarn Gulf engagement is one such event, where a Deathwatch strike cruiser intercepted a suspected Hrud migration fleet. But instead of battle, the Marines encountered a derelict void structure, adrift, ancient and pockmarked, but humming with time distortion. Boarding parties reported strange chronal bleed. One Marine claimed to see the battle occur before it happened, watching his own death on a cracked vid panel before the engagement began. 3 others died of spontaneous cardiac failure as their hearts forgot how to beat. The entire void structure vanished in a pulse of blue-gray light hours later. No trace was left. Even in the famed Imperial Guard, references to the Hrud are taboo. Veterans of Cadia, those who fought not just demons and traitors but things in the shadows between, whisper of missions where time seemed to betray them, where men aged to ash in seconds, where ammunition dissolved and orders were forgotten mid-sentence. The term Hrudfield exists in some regimental slang, denoting any zone of unexplainable decay or memory loss. It's spoken of quietly, like a curse. More chilling are the reports from rogue traders, bold, foolhardy, and often the first to stumble upon the signs of Hrud movement. One such explorer, Lucian Dravak, documented what he called time tides in the asteroid tombs of Sector Caridon. His logs described shifting architecture, skeletal remains aging backwards, and an encounter with what he believed was a Hrud matriarch, an immense cloaked being surrounded by a field of warping starlight. Dravak's logs end abruptly. His ship was found adrift 2 sectors away, every chronometer on board fused and spinning at maximum acceleration. The crew were all dead, their bodies mummified as if by centuries in vacuum, though no hull breaches were found. Tactically, the Hrud favor disorientation and disruption over direct confrontation. They strike when their prey is most vulnerable, not physically, but temporally. In the moment before a command is given, in the instant when a plan hinges on perfect timing, they appear, unleash a flare of entropy, and vanish. Often, survivors aren't even sure they were attacked. Reports contain phrases like, "Time slipped, the moment was lost, it already happened." These are not the descriptions of warfare. They are the symptoms of reality betrayal. And in rare, terrible moments, the Hrud do act in unison. Migration events, when large numbers of Hrud move together, have occasionally resulted in what can only be described as temporal genocide. Civilizations unmake themselves. Cities age and collapse before their wars can even begin. Sometimes it's subtle. A slowing of growth, a weariness in the air, machines that stop working. Other times it's absolute. An entire planet becomes its own ruin. The Inquisition, despite its secrecy, fears the Hrud in a way few enemies inspire. Not because of what they do, but because of what they imply. That victory is irrelevant. That time itself is fragile. That memory can be eaten. That meaning can be undone. When the Hrud fight, they don't just kill, they erase. And in the dark, where the stars whisper and causality bends, sometimes that's all it takes. The Inquisition has always acted as both sword and shield, a purging flame against corruption, and a shroud of secrecy over truths too dangerous for common minds. But when it comes to the Hrud, their response is neither open war nor public edict. It is erasure, suppression. The quiet, methodical removal of knowledge from the pages of human thought. Because with the Hrud, the danger is not just what they do, but what they mean. And if that meaning spreads, if enough minds come to understand it, then the stability of the Imperium's very narrative might collapse. Within the Ordo Xenos, records of Hrud encounters are held under layers of restriction, normally reserved for the most dangerous warp entities. Clearance levels are draped in recursive locks, data nodes set to delete themselves after a single access. There are entire archives, real and digital, purged, not because they were infected, but because they simply knew too much. To know the Hrud is to court chronological contamination, not infection, but dissonance. The idea that time is not safe. That memory is unreliable. That history can be consumed. This is why the Inquisition suppresses the Hrud. Not because they're Xenos. The Imperium has slaughtered 1,000 species more openly and more proudly, but because the Hrud expose a fundamental lie at the heart of Imperial dogma, that the past is fixed, that the Emperor's light is eternal, that faith and memory are enough. The Hrud show that none of that is true, that even the greatest truth, left unguarded, can decay. Interrogators and acolytes assigned to Hrud containment efforts often find themselves operating under extreme restrictions. They are not allowed to take notes in physical form. Digital logs must be updated on encrypted, non-networked cogitators with no external data ports. Many work alone or in pairs, and almost all are routinely subjected to psychic memory audits. Not because they are suspected of heresy, but because exposure to Hrud phenomena can alter perception so deeply that even the most loyal mind might be compromised by something as simple as a wrong date, a misplaced name, or a memory that never happened. Suppression often begins with silence. Vox traffic in affected areas is cut. Astropathic channels are rerouted or temporarily decommissioned. Entire sectors may be quarantined for warp instability, while covert teams scour worlds for signs of temporal fracture. When evidence is found, degraded machinery, aged corpses, incoherent logs, the planet is often marked for exterminatus or cultural reset. Sometimes this means planetary bombardment. Other times it's subtler, re-education campaigns, the burning of archives, the rediscovery of a rewritten history. And there are hints, just whispers, that the Inquisition may have gone even further, that they have found a way to erase knowledge on a mass scale. Some black ships carry rumored devices known as chronoseals, psychic-tuned engines that project a kind of anti-memory field. It's said that they can erase not just documents, but awareness. That when triggered, they can make a population forget something happened at all. There is no proof of their existence, but there are enough blank spots in the records, enough sectors with massive undocumented gaps, to give weight to the theory. Not all Inquisitors agree with the policy of suppression. Some argue that the Hrud represent a threat so unique, so fundamental, that open study is required. These radical thinkers often vanish. Others defect, abandoning the Imperium entirely in pursuit of chronal truth. A few go rogue, establishing hidden sanctums where Hrud data is collected and compared. Most are hunted down eventually, not because they've allied with the Hrud, but because they see them clearly. And that clarity to the Ordo is contagion. There are even rumors that a few Inquisitors have tried to use the Hrud to lure them into enemy territory, to trap them near rival political assets, to weaponize their decay field in assassinations and ideological purges. These attempts always end badly. One case involved an attempt to herd a Hrud migration through a rebellious sector of the Segmentum Obscurus. The entire operation backfired. Time collapsed in unpredictable ways. Loyal forces turned on each other. A forge world aged itself into rust, and the rebellion spread backwards, igniting revolts that began before the Hrud even arrived. The Inquisitor responsible was never found. His last message was dated 6 years before he was born. What remains consistent is the Inquisition's fear, not just of the Hrud, but of their knowledge, of the idea that entropy can be sentient, that time itself can be prey, that history can be unmade not by fire, but by hunger. To admit the Hrud's existence publicly would be to admit that the Imperium's core myths, its unbroken lineage, its divine order, its sacred memory, are vulnerable. And so, they are denied. But suppression is not elimination. Despite all efforts, the Hrud persist, not just in the galaxy, but in the cracks of awareness. They linger in the confused memories of soldiers, in the rusted ruins of once thriving worlds, in the data glitches of cogitators too old to lie properly. The truth is not gone, it is just aged, hidden in footnotes, disbelieved, forgotten. And maybe that's what the Hrud truly are. Not just a species, but the embodiment of forgetting, the slow fading of clarity, the loss of sharp edges, the soft erosion of certainty. The Inquisition fights to preserve reality from them, not with fire, but with silence, with censorship, with a war not on bodies, but on remembrance. Because in the end, the greatest weapon against a time eater is to pretend it was never there. The Hrud are not simply a problem to solve. They are a question carved into the bones of the galaxy itself. Their very existence forces a reckoning with what time means, with how the universe holds its shape. For while other threats bring death, conquest, mutation, the Hrud bring something far more insidious: unbeing. They erode the spine of history, melt the threads that bind cause to effect. They are the entropy that whispers in the quiet, the forgetting that walks. All of Warhammer 40k is obsessed with the past, with tradition, memory, legacy, worship of what has come before. It is a setting where history is weapon, religion, justification. The Imperium doesn't just fight for survival, it fights to preserve the idea that what was matters. But the Hrud, simply by existing, say otherwise. They live without memory, feed without care for what they devour. They do not look backward, they erase backward. They unmake. Imagine fighting something that doesn't kill your army, it unbirths it. You send 10,000 soldiers into the breach, and what returns is not corpses, not wounded, but confusion. Records of the deployment vanish. Officers who never served are blamed. Parents remember children who never left, and those who do remember, their memories unravel with each retelling, like sand slipping between fingers. No glory, no martyrdom, just the hollow silence of a war that never was. This is why the Hrud are so terrifying. Not their decay, not their shadows, but the idea that they are proof that time is not a river. It's a fabric, and fabrics can tear. Worse, they can fray. The Hrud don't punch holes in reality, they wear it down. And once it frays enough, it doesn't take an enemy to break it, it unravels on its own. There are those who theorize the Hrud are not native to our timeline at all, that they are refugees from a broken one, that their hunger is a desperate act, the feeding of a race whose own history collapsed behind them, and who now must devour our time to continue. It's a terrifying thought. Not predators, but escapees. Not monsters, but victims of a temporal genocide so absolute they no longer know their own origin. They are not what's breaking the galaxy. They are what survived its breaking. But even if that's true, the result is the same. The Hrud do not stop. They do not negotiate. They do not mourn. They move through our world like a disease of forgetting, and every moment they feed leaves the galaxy weaker. It doesn't matter what they once were. What they are now is a hazard to meaning itself. And in a setting like Warhammer, where symbolism, memory, and legacy are everything, that makes them the most existential threat imaginable. Even the ruinous powers cannot compare. Chaos warps reality, but it replaces it with something else. Madness, yes, but active madness. The gods of the warp crave worship, spread belief, rewrite the world in their image. The Hrud do not replace, they subtract. They are the anti-myth, the nullification of story. To worship the Hrud would be to praise silence, to kneel before loss. So what can be done? How does one fight entropy given form? Some theorists suggest developing temporal bastions, places anchored so deeply in fixed memory, psychic ritual, and mechanical precision that the Hrud cannot feed without alerting the entire Imperium. Others propose weaponizing time itself, chronostabilization fields, retroactive denial systems, even gene-coded memory fortresses encoded in every citizen's mind. But in truth, these are fantasies. Noble, desperate, beautiful fantasies. Because the truth is simpler. You don't fight the Hrud, you remember them. That is the Imperium's greatest defense. Not fire, Not steel. Remembrance. If every guardsman knew the signs, the wrong shadows, the flickering clocks, the taste of old dust, they could warn others. If every adept was trained to see the unraveling in data streams, perhaps decay could be caught before it spread. If even a fraction of the Imperium acknowledged what walks in its forgotten corners, then perhaps the Hrud would lose the one thing that gives them power, our silence. And that may be the great irony. The Hrud are not powerful because they are strong. They are powerful because they are ignored, forgotten, erased by those who fear the implications of their truth. But in the end, time remembers, even if we don't. Even if our systems fail and our archives rot and our children are born into a galaxy frayed by entropy, there will be whispers, signs. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the act of refusing to forget is the beginning of resistance. Because the moment we stop pretending the Hrud are myth is the moment they stop being inevitable. And that is the future they cannot feed on. There is a vision, whispered in shadowed corners of the Ordo Chronos, hidden in warp-twisted scrolls, scribbled in the margins of lost librarium texts, that the Hrud are not simply scavengers of a dying galaxy, but omens, harbingers. That they do not just consume time as a necessity, but as a message. And that message is this: the end is not fire. It is forgetting. What if the Hrud are not merely here to survive? What if they are the symptom of a greater unraveling? A sickness of time spreading across the stars. In every sector where they walk, history breaks, memory distorts, continuity collapses. Some say this is the work of the Hrud. Others say this is why the Hrud are here, that they come where the timeline is already weak, where stories are brittle, where reality has forgotten itself. There are scattered reports, too coincidental to ignore, of Hrud migrations aligning with major rift events. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the fall of Cadia, the fading of the Astronomicon. What if the Hrud are not causing these fractures but drawn to them, like carrion beasts to a corpse or priests to a sacred flame, not out of malevolence, but duty, hunger, or both? Some of the most radical chronomystics posit that the Hrud are agents of the galaxy's final phase, that they do not simply accelerate decay but prepare reality for its last breath. They do not just eat time, they smooth the edges of dying epochs. They silence voices that were never meant to echo into the next age. They erase the unnecessary, not cruelly, but gently, as one would fold away a crumbling page so the next chapter may begin unspoiled. And if this is true, then the galaxy may be already past the point of recovery. In the old night, before the rise of the Imperium, there were stars that flickered in and out of existence, sectors where records appear and vanish across different codexes, and planets with multiple conflicting histories. These are not warp anomalies. These may be Hrud scars, old feeding grounds where time itself was consumed and rewritten. Evidence not of recent corruption, but of routine maintenance. As if the galaxy has been edited before. As if the Hrud have always been part of the cycle. This theory terrifies even the most fearless inquisitors, because it suggests that no action, no fortress, no doctrine can hold back the entropy. That the Hrud are not a foe to defeat, but the natural consequence of everything the Imperium is, bloated, aged, decaying, drowning in its own myth. That their arrival is not an attack, but a reckoning. Perhaps they are not the end of all things. Perhaps they are only the beginning of the end. There's a haunting passage in the lost writings of Saint Varnus the Contradictor, an ecclesiarch excommunicated for heretical thoughts on time and salvation. He wrote, "At the twilight of the stars, when faith rusts and memory spoils, there will come the cloaked ones. Not to damn us, but to collect what was always theirs. They will walk among our tombs, not to desecrate, but to carry our remains to silence. Do not fear them. They are the ones who turn out the lights." If he was right, then perhaps we are living not in the last days of a war-torn galaxy, but in its epilogue. And the Hrud are here not to feed, but to conclude, to make peace between now and never. And yet, even in this bleak vision, a question remains. Do we accept this? The Imperium has never accepted death quietly. It fights, claws, screams against fate itself. Even in its decay, it is defiant. And perhaps that is the only true resistance against the Hrud. Not some miracle weapon. Not a grand discovery, but refusal. Refusal to be forgotten. Refusal to go gentle into their entropy. Because if the Hrud are the final editors of the galaxy's story, then let them remember that we roared our ending, Let them taste not silence but rage, not confusion but conviction, not faded parchment, but burning steel etched with names that will not be erased. And if you've come this far through this chronicle, fellow traveler, I ask only this. Remember, subscribe to this channel, join this memory, keep this fire alive, not for glory, not for vengeance, but so that when the Hrud come for us, we are not alone in the dark.